Hey mushroom people, it's Anna McHugh. I'm here hanging out with this beautiful twinned up chanterelle. I want to talk to you about chanterelle mushrooms a little bit. Primarily the differences between different mushrooms in the Cantharellus or chanterelle genus that are, again, different species, but are all kind of under the umbrella of chanterelle. And oftentimes when I'm talking about these mushrooms or I identify them, I'll just say Cantharellus species and leave it there. And the reason for that is that we have a lot of species that, from just sort of a casual inspection, you really can't tell exactly which species they are. So I have a couple of ostensible guesses of what some of these are, and then I'm just going to talk about sort of the variability in these fruiting bodies, because when you learn how to identify chanterelles, you have a few really, noteworthy features, but they can vary a good bit. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to talk about a couple of edible amanitas, a poisonous amanita, and let's see here, I've also got a purple mushroom just for grins. But let's start with the chanterelles. So if you're not familiar, chanterelle mushrooms are very frequently, like, this is sort of the classic and iconic color and shape for them. So they're, oftentimes bright orange or sort of egg yolk colored. They are also, instead of being gilled underneath, they have false gills. And false gills are basically, this is a really good example. They're sort of wrinkly and shallow, and also right at the top you can see a lot of sort of forking and splitting going on. In addition to that, when you open up a chanterelle mushroom, what you're going to see on the inside is nice white flesh that is firm and kind of stringy like string cheese. And many times, these in particular do have a nice fruity aroma. Now, the issue and difficulty you start to get into with chanterelles is that, beyond those characteristics, you do have different species that have different appearances, and also species that really, like, some that I simply cannot tell them apart. And so I do my best, but at the same time, I'm like, a chanterelle can vary between, something that looks very much like this. So it's really, the gills are rather smooth, or the false gills are rather smooth, all the way to something that has kind of deep and blade-like gills, or false gills. And so, you have a good bit of variability in their forms and fruiting bodies. All right, I'm going to talk about a couple of different things that you'll see with chanterelles that's reasonably common. So the first one that I've been waving around because this is the best specimen of chanterelles that I found this morning thus far is a twin reaction or twin fruiting pattern here. This is really, significant. You see a lot of chanterelle mushrooms that grow in 2s and 3s. They're not always conjoined at the base like this, and it doesn't always happen, but very frequently you'll see chanterelles kind of popping up, 1s and 2s together. And that's always, kind of delightful. Certainly, chanterelles, they don't grow in massive clusters, but you will find them in small clusters. And there's a species, I think it's distinct, I can't tell, that fruits typically later in the summertime, and sometimes you'll get 5 or 6 fruiting bodies all stuck together like this. But these mushrooms grow from the ground, and, again, this twinning reaction is pretty common. Also, with these, the false gills, I've already pointed this out, are really, really smooth. So you don't have, much to do at all to, take your fingernail and scrape it right off, and you see the sort of orangey white flesh underneath. So this is a really iconic, like, pair of chanterelles. They're bright orange, and they have very false wrinkly gills and a little bit of this, sort of fruity aroma. But as you start to, find other chanterelles in the woods, you'll start to see specimens that, even though they have, forking false gills and they are kind of wrinkly, if you're looking at it, you'll see that, these do kind of look deep and blade-like a little bit. And this is especially when you compare pictures of chanterelles against sort of like if you Google chanterelle, You'll sometimes get a picture of Cantharellus formosus, which is the Pacific Northwest golden chanterelle, and it has like these, it's not at all like gills. It's very, very wrinkled, very, very forked. And so when you say false gills, this definitely applies. These are false gills, but they look a lot deeper and a lot more like classic gills. And when I say classic gills, what I mean is this. So, you know, deep, blade-like, distinct, you know, pieces of mushroom material where the spores form. So you have, you know, mushrooms that have deeper blade-like gills. You also, on this specimen, this is a pretty good example of, I'm not sure which species this is, again, but I'm going to take an educated guess and call this either Cantharellus deceptivus or Cantharellus phasmatis. So it's either the deceptive or the ghost chanterelle. And the reason that I make this hypothesis is because the mushroom is really pale and white on the stem. And you can see how I split my twins in half. And you can see by way of comparison, this is a little more on the orangey color, orangey side, whereas this is fairly white. This is not to say that this isn't, you know, one of those two species. I don't think that this is, however, because it's much darker here, and also its flesh is much darker. So Cantharellus deceptivus and phasmatis have a, you know, they're noteworthy for being sort of light colored underneath. This is an even better example, really, of a mushroom that I would definitely consider to be one of those two. Another thing that's kind of fun about, I think, deceptivus in particular, is you oftentimes have this like fattier base. And so a lot of your chanterelles are sort of tall and slender and, you know, more flowery looking. And so if you have a mushroom that's more sort of chunky and fat, that is, you know, something that I have observed with those, you know, mushrooms before. So you have, you know, orangey, you have whitish, you have wrinkles, you have deeper, more blade-like wrinkles. And here's some more of these more lighter colored ones that are in that orange zone. Another thing that you'll notice very frequently, these haven't picked it up a tremendous amount, but there is some sort of orangey staining that starts to appear over time as, you know, you've handled the mushrooms and they come into contact with the air and sit around for a little bit. The one other mushroom I want to show you, and I wish that the color picked up a little bit better. Oh, this one maybe actually will be, will show the color a little better. Okay, yes it does. So this is, I'm almost certain, Cantharellus velutinus. And that is one of the Cantharellus species that is called a peachy chanterelle. So we have small peachy chanterelles that grow up in the mountains, but Cantharellus velutinus is much more of a sort of classic chanterelle insofar as it's a little bit, you know, it's got a nice substantial stem and also, you know, nice sort of wrinkly underside going on there. And then it is, instead of being that bright orange, it's more of this sort of peachy color. And, you know, I absolutely adore it. I really wish it were easier to capture, you know, photographically. Like, you add the right light has to be just right to capture one of the things about this that this specimen doesn't have in great measure either. Sometimes there's like even more sort of pinky peach around the perimeter of this, you know, sort of gilled, or, you know, the fertile surface underneath. So it's a very, very pretty mushroom. And again, I'm pretty confident Cantharellus velutinus. And when I say pretty confident, I'm like, okay, all of these are coming home. All of these are perfectly edible and safe. It's just always that academic question of like, how far can you get down the genus species rabbit hole? And it's very ironic to me that mushrooms like chanterelles that are so commonly collected by beginners and are so very safe for people who are novices to, you know, to get interested in collecting, also are confounding to people who have a lot more experience than I do. One final feature that I really like to see on chanterelles that are nice and firm and good to eat is sometimes you'll see this, like they'll start to peel, and it's basically the, you know, the flesh itself is pretty dried out. And so that's something that oftentimes when I see like little upward lifted peels of flesh, that means that it's nice and firm. It hasn't been eaten by bugs on the inside. Like I'm gonna pop this open and it makes almost a nice snapping noise. And you can see this is perfect inside. A lot of times you'll open up a chanterelle and you'll find it has some residents, or at least some bugs that have been chewing on it. Okay, so that's all our chanterelle information for now. I'm going to rapidly talk about a look-alike for chanterelles, and this is unfortunately not in very good condition, but this is Geraneema strombodes. And I don't know if it has a common name, but it is a mushroom that sometimes people will mistake for chanterelle mushrooms. The reason being that they have kind of a golden-ish color. They have that sort of flowery, you know, uplifted appearance. And then also, and these specimens aren't great for it, but the, you know, running down the stem kind of appearance of these gills sometimes fools people, and they think that that is, you know, synonymous with this sort of decurrent pattern where you have the false gills that connect to and run down the stem. There is a very distinct like difference between where these gills stop and where the stem begins, but sometimes it, you know, just given the shape of it, it falls into a gray category for people. Geraneema strombodes is edible, or is listed as edible. I don't eat it. I haven't eaten it, and there's a couple of reasons why. So first of all, it's mostly gill material, and you know, these are really kind of thin and flimsy mushrooms. They're hollow on the inside. That's another thing that will keep you from mistaking this for a chanterelle. So you can see, you know, the interior of this little stem is hollow, whereas a chanterelle would be nice and firm and white. And then additionally, and probably most importantly, just from a, like, you know, you spot it at a distance and you know whether or not to approach it, is these mushrooms grow on wood. So Geraneema strombodes is a wood decomposer. It also grows on pine, and there are a lot of wood decomposing mushrooms that just don't grow on pine. And so you'll oftentimes see, you know, an entire like log of them, and they are very pretty. Sometimes when they're in really good condition, they're sort of this like light yellowy color. It's you know, almost a little sort of sheen on it, almost like there's a you know, velveteen appearance to the surface. So they're really quite pretty mushrooms, but they are not chanterelles. So that is one of the mushrooms I'd kind of consider to be a look-alike for chanterelle mushrooms. Not one to be avoided, but certainly not one that is considered to be, you know, a desirable edible, at least not by anybody that I know. Like, I've never had someone say, oh, you've just got to try Geraneema strombodes. It will rock your world. That does not mean that there isn't somebody out there who feels that way about it. Okay, so let's talk about Amanitas. But before we do that, I'm going to talk about one more edible species that I found that is really quite beautiful as well. So this is the Russula acrostosa group. So this is a species group, and I'm not, you know, able to get any further than that. I don't know if there are delineations between these different, you know, species at this point. But Russula acrostosa group is one of the cracked cap russulas. So russula mushrooms are very common. They are white-gilled and white-stemmed, typically. They grow on the ground, and they're also very, like, iconically mushroomy looking. So you have a nice little button top and, you know, white blade-like gills underneath. Here's another one that's a little bit older. And then also as they, you know, are, like, in their, but before they're attacked by bugs, essentially, the thing that makes a russula really easy to ID is that they will snap like a piece of chalk. So they're very, very, brittle, and they're very easy to break apart. So a lot of mushrooms will smush, or they're fibrous or what have you, but russulas are, you know, snap right open. Russula acrostosa group, you know, commonly called one of the cracked cap or quilted russulas, is really beautiful to me for a couple of reasons. So first of all, you have a mushroom that has this cracking pattern, and that's really something. The variability of the color of Russula acrostosa group is kind of mind-blowing. So these are really pretty specimens because they're sort of a pinky purple color, but sometimes you'll you'll find these, and they're more, this one has a little bit of it, more greeny yellow, almost like, you know, light army green. And you'll see just variability even in a single fruiting body between like pale and almost gray to yellowy to purple to pink. So, you know, the main thing you're looking for in Russula acrostosa group is this cracked appearance, and this is a good edible. There are a couple of other cracked cap russulas. So Russula parvovirescens, it's a blue-green cracked cap russula, is really pretty. But Russula acrostosa group is the one where it's like, it can be green, it can be gray, it can be pink, it can be light purple. But one way or the other, it has this beautiful and very distinct cracking pattern on the top. All right, so let's talk about our Amanitas. We have Amanita, I think, Beningiana. If it is not Amanita Beningiana, then I'm going to go ahead and call it Amanita arcansana. But I'm pretty good, or pretty confident on Amanita Beningiana. Anyway, this is an Amanita in section Caesariae. So we have a lot of different mushrooms that are kind of commonly called Caesars and slender Caesars and tall Caesars, all kinds of different things. But these are mushrooms that are in the Amanita genus, and the Caesariae section contains mushrooms that are oftentimes kind of brightly colored, either, you know, red or yellow, or this really pleasing sort of orangey yellow brown. Amanita Beningiana is characterized by having sort of these yellowy gills, and that's the reason I'm gonna falling on the direction of like Amanita Beningiana as opposed to arcansana or one of the other sort of yellowy amanitas that are not even properly named yet. But you know, it has these sort of yellowy colored gills. That's a little unusual for an amanita as well. Most amanitas have white gills underneath, and so Amanita section Caesariae has some yellow gilled members, and that makes them interesting. So you have a cap and stem mushroom with these yellowy gills. You have a big, nice yellowy ring on the stem. It is really, really delicate, so it can come off quite easily. And there's not a lot there. It's just, overall, this is a pretty stinking large mushroom, and therefore it has a fairly large ring on the stem. Also at the base, you have what is called a vulva. So this is just a cup of protective tissue. And in the case of a lot of your Caesar mushrooms, this cup is really nice and cottony. It also splits open and leaves this very pleasing little like V shape. And so, you know, it splits open, the mushroom comes out, and it's, you know, a beautiful cap. What you have going on here is what's called an umbo. So you have a little sort of bump in the middle that is darker and more of this sort of like amber color. You also have pretty significant striation. So those are stripy grooves, essentially, that go, you know, from the outer edge of your mushroom inward. And the striation reaches to about here. So I would call this fairly significant striation for this particular mushroom. So this is, you know, a couple of specimens of Amanita. Again, most likely Beningiana or arcansana. Either way, it is definitely Amanita section Caesariae, which are all known to be edible. The one that is the most popular is Amanita jacksonii, and that is a bright red and orangey yellow mushroom that has orange scales or chevrons on the stem. And there's much hoopla about, you know, how to tell Amanita jacksonii from its relatives in Amanita section Caesariae that are red. But as luck would have it, we also have some yellow ones, and you can just totally cruise by all the questions of what's on the, you know, what's on the stem. Does it have scabs or scales or not? You could just say it's one of the yellow Caesars. All right. Next up, in terms of our Amanitas, we have a different stem-based type. This is Amanita amera rubescens group, also known as the blusher, and this is another species group, so, you know, not going to get any further than that. I don't think there are really good delineations beyond the fact that, like, we have more than one thing, so we're going to call it a group from here on in until we get more information. But, you know, similarly, as with other Amanitas, it's a cap and stem mushroom with a ring on the stem. And it also has, unlike the Caesars I was showing you, it does have an enlarged stem base. but it doesn't have like a cup or sac of tissue. So here's a better example. It's just basically like a bulbous base. And very frequently you'll see in the base of this bulb a lot of the blushing activity that gives this mushroom its common name, but also oftentimes little pits and blemishes that are like just little, you know, holes. I think these are caused by bugs that will just burrow in the base, and they oftentimes leave these really ruddy, you know, pits in the base of this sort of bulbous stem. In addition to that, what you have is a mushroom that's kind of a like pale, you know, like fawn color, or even, you know, beige. And it has warts on the cap that are kind of similarly, you know, beigeish, a little bit on the yellow side. Warts can be rubbed off, and so, you know, this is just the remains of the universal veil, or the tissue that's at the base of the mushroom when it's immature. And so as the mushroom matures, you get material from the base of the stem that just ends up on the cap, and that's where your warts come from. But what really makes, you know, the blusher super distinctive is, well, it blushes. It has this reddening reaction that is really quite dramatic. And so, you know, it's very easy to identify them. Even when they're, you know, younger, once they start to get rained on, you start to see these really, you know, beautiful and radical coloration patterns. And I had a couple younger ones. Here they are. All right, so when they're babies, you oftentimes don't have nearly as much in the way of blushing. Also, this is a really good, you know, image of the base where you have some cracking going on, but not a lot of, you know, blushing or blemishes going on quite yet. And then also you can see a lot of this universal veil material is still stuck to the cap when it's a baby. And it's, you know, again, sort of yellowy in color, but as it gets rained on, it kind of dulls in color, and it starts to mix in with the pinks, and it's not quite as distinctively yellow. But this is another one of these Amanita amaryrubescens. We also have really pleasing yellowish blusher, Amanita flavorubens, and that is not what this is. Unfortunately, it's not quite yellow enough in my estimation to fall into that category. And actually here is a great example of like slightly enlarged base with a pit that has some blushing in it. That's really distinctive for Amanita amaryrubescens group. Okay, so before I release you back into the wild, I want to show you a purple mushroom because I love purple mushrooms. This is Tylepylus Plummio Violetus. It is not edible. It is bitter as a son of a gun. So like really, really unpalatable. But it's really pretty. And so I love finding these. They're, you know, kind of like purplish brown and a little bit indistinct from the top, especially as they get larger. So Tylepylus, like this is a pretty small specimen. It could get to be about the size of my hand and much more sort of a mousy brown by that point. You have, it is a bolete type mushroom, so the Tylepylus genus does not have gills. It instead has a sponge layer underneath, and in the case of a lot of these mushrooms, that sponge layer is actually quite thin. But, you know, you can see right here, so you have a little bit of spongy material, and that's where the spores come from. You know, as the mushroom matures, it goes from a really pristine white color to kind of a, like a little bit on the brownish lilac color, and that lilac is sort of the color of the spores. Tylepylus Plummio Violetus is distinct from other mushrooms in the Tylepylus genus because it is so very purple, you know, so very Professor Plum. Like really, if my clue game is incomplete, I could just bring this home and use it as a game piece, because what you have is this, you know, deep purple streaky color. It's nice and plump. It's really just the bee's knees and fun to observe, even though, you know, if I were to chew on it, it is supremely bitter. All right, so that's everything I have for you today. I hope you're having a great mushroom season. I have really started to stretch my legs and find a lot more variety, and it is just a delight. So I can't wait to share some of my finds with you next time I'm out in the woods.